All right. Hello, Internet. Welcome back to me being here about talking about what's been going on in the world of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Um, so, tonight, on this Friday evening, we're going to be playing catch up in the form of potentially multiple live streams here. And I'm doing that mostly because it seems, I think, algorithm wise, people enjoy it. It does better if I generate another live stream than just changing the title of this one. Also, realistically, it's going to make it easier for people after the fact. If I like stop this live stream and then start a new one, because the new one will like if it can kind of be self-contained. While I could do timestamps and stuff on a very long live stream, these just I think will do better in the long run. So tonight, if you're willing to come along on a journey with me, we'll cover the druid, the wizard, and the ranger, and we'll get them all out in individual videos, individual live streams tonight. That way, come Monday, assuming work isn't a tirade, a trip from hell again, we will be able to ideally continue with a regular live stream schedule around the time of release rather than playing catch up on a Friday night. So, that being said, for those of you who are curious, I currently do not. I finished up my shift this morning at 7 a.m., didn't get out of there till probably around 8 o'clock in the morning. I do stream on Twitch, Nick. There's a lot of things going on here, and I'll explain that in a second. Um, so, one, I will not. There's more weather coming tomorrow night into Sunday, so more long shifts are on the horizon. Don't know if there'll be day shifts or night shifts at this point. I'm looking to try to shoot for some day shifts. Potentially. And there's always the chance, knock on wood, and, hopefully we'll get lucky and the weather actually won't materialize into anything. But there's also the potential that it will. So just consider that. Now, as far as streaming on Twitch versus streaming here on YouTube, one, news, kind of this sort of discussion based content will just do better on YouTube, hands down, than other kinds of streams over on Twitch. Now, there's benefits to streaming on Twitch, right? There's a concept of rating and people coming in. So I am still streaming like live play, like gameplay related stuff over on Twitch. I think that just does better over there because people kind of know what they're getting into. So when we play, Fandelver and Below on Wednesdays, we stream that over on Twitch. We obviously haven't the past couple of last week, and we won't be doing it either this week either because of weather related things and storms and my day job taking over my life. So and then anything kind of like fun gaming related, it makes more sense to stream it on Twitch just because of the way the audience is. So like if I'm going to continue, I have to still like you can see there's some stuff over here. There's like Legos and things. Need to finish building that Lego set, the D&D Lego set, and it would just do better on Twitch than it would do on YouTube. It's just the nature of the beast, really. Uh, so, you know, and again, honestly, being upfront, um, at least for a while there towards the start of the year, Twitch reached out with a contract for me to stream so many non-video gaming hours on Twitch for a pretty sizable chunk of money, if I'm being completely honest with you. So it was absolutely worth it for that kind of 3-month stint to stream a lot of gameplay and non-video game related content on Twitch. That contract has since ended, so I'm still streaming the gameplay stuff over there and like other fun things. Like a lot of people have been talking about how they want to see other stuff and things make sense to stream it on Twitch. But this kind of news and discussion based content here around things does better for me on YouTube because my audience is mostly here on YouTube. So there you go. That's a little peek behind the curtain as to what goes on. So Um, and yeah, like I said, I think just chatting is a shot in the dark kind of when it comes to Twitch gameplay. Like people know what they're getting into. Also, YouTube live streams do well at pointing you to other videos, and also streaming it on Twitch. I would then need to take that content and then upload it separately and kind of cut it up to make the content over here on YouTube. Whereas if I upload a live stream to YouTube where it's something people are likely going to want to watch after the fact, which I guess is also a point, right? Like just chatting Q&A about random stuff, people don't necessarily want to see that after the fact. Some of you do because you like to just hear me talk and want to know my opinions on things, and that's awesome. And I love that. But like general Q&A random stuff, people don't necessarily care too much about watching that after the fact. Knowing my thoughts on something like a subclass or a reveal video or something like that, people want to know what I have to say about that. And live streaming it to YouTube also just kind of auto keeps it for me and makes it available for people to watch. You did Dragon Drake. We have not started anything yet. So we are jumping into the Druid here in just a sec. And then we're going to do also, we're probably going to do them as separate live streams. You might have missed that at the start, where I'll kind of end this live stream and then just don't go anywhere because I'm going to start you'll see a brand new link for a brand new live stream where we'll do the Wizard and we'll do the Ranger. And we're going to do that so for folks who miss the live stream and want to watch it after the fact, they don't have to sift through like a 3-hour live stream to find the content they want. They'll be able to just get it like that. Yeah, Tyler, we can definitely talk about that. Maybe we'll go at the end here. So let us go ahead and jump in to the Druid here. And let's go.
Today we are talking about the Druid. There is a ton of new in the Druid.
We took a careful look at our nature friend, the Druid, and looked at every root of its tree, cultivated its garden, and so much now is either brand new or enhanced in this class. And a lot of this development that we did in the class, members of the D&D community were with us on the journey through the Unearthed Arcana process, but the final version has even elements that people didn't get to see as a part of the UA process. And the new starts right at first level in this class. So
before we dive into that, I just want to give you my thoughts on the Druid, because I think it's good to kind of level set that first. Honestly, I didn't think the Druid needed any updates necessarily. Now, I already hear you arguing, so let's take a pause for a sec. It was not a class, in my opinion, that was in desperate need of adjustments, like, say, the Monk or the Ranger or even like something like the Fighter, right? A lot of them were really good, but there were classes that were better in certain aspects. Like, right, I would say the Paladin was really well done. I would say the Cleric was really well done. And I would have considered the Druid, one of those classes, the Wizard as well, were ones that are really well done. So I didn't think that the Druid necessarily needed any changes. However, I do recognize that the Moon Druid shenanigans at higher levels is just bananas. I recognize that too because one of the earliest memories I have from 5e going on to a variety of different forums. Back then, we still had the official D&D forums on the Wizard, kind of forums section that they had before they closed those out. Was people always used to love to get, and like those forums are where I used to go when I was younger in older editions to like craft out build information and like look into min-maxing and all this other kind of stuff I used to do back in 3.5. And what often came up in those is it possible for a level 20 martial character to ever kill a level 20 Moon Druid? And that became like a pseudo standard of power for most things, at least at that point in time in that specific space of D&D, was could this build or this thing you did or this combo with this, that, and the other thing, could they take out, if they were martial based, right? Could they kill a level 20 Moon Druid? And the concept being, again, a level 20 Moon Druid can shapeshift every turn into a different creature, getting a new stack of hit points. They could also cast spells while in wild shape form, and realistically, probably blowing their 9th level spell slot on a spell like Foresight or something like that to give them a ton of just advantage and great things like that. So that was like a power, like that was like a level, right? Could you do that? Was there a martial class or a build that you could come up with that had the capability of defeating a level 20 Moon Druid? Recognizing at that point that a level 20 Moon Druid is pretty crazy in its strength and what it could do with the swapping and just constantly churning in new pools of hit points. And I mean, look no further than like the level 20 Battle Royale that Critical Role did with their characters at level 20, and Keyleth was just a monster in that fight because of the fact that, like, obviously you have spell slots and you're limited in the different things you have and the different abilities and stuff you can do. But the fact that every turn even if she got like Nova down from like an air or fire or whatever elemental form back to Keyleth's base form, the next turn she was just going to pop into another elemental form. Even if she wasn't using the elemental abilities of that, it was just the resistances and the hit points, and you could just keep rebuilding a new sack of hit points to just constantly keep yourself in the fight and alive. You could heal on your off turn because you could cast spells at that point. Lots of stuff going on. Now, I also recognize that that's not like a bar you need to truly worry about all the time. Whether or not this class can be, what you're looking at, how easy it is to defeat it. But if you take the essence of that and parse it down to a smaller extent on the Dungeon Master side, though, like, depending on how people go about doing their Moon Druid, you could almost be completely unkillable depending on number of wild shapes and how you would go about using these things and the forms you had, and recognizing also that, like, if your DM had, this is something that I dealt with a lot because I love coming up with custom monsters and stuff. So when I was running for one of my players who was their first time was playing a Moon Druid, I had a bunch of custom monsters that happened. Some of them happened to be beasts that she was allowed to wild shape into because obviously she'd seen them, and they fell into like a challenge rating that was available for her to turn into. So I would provide her with other stat blocks beyond just like the regular ones you could find in like the player's handbook and the monster manual. And some of them were pretty wild, the different abilities that like I had done like a black dragon half spider. So it was like a giant spider, but like had resistance to acid and an acid breath. Technically still qualified as a beast, so she could technically transform into that. Stuff like that. Right. So like then she's got all this stuff to track, and then like really am I just hurting myself in the long run as the DM by giving these extra forms? But that's part of the fun of it too. Like if the DM comes up with a funky creature and it happens to be a beast, then you get to enjoy that, which is pretty cool. So I recognize that ultimately, long story long, that the druid, specifically in the wild shape department, and more specifically in the moon druid wild shape department, needed to be brought more back into parity, more in band with other things. And I think that's what we're seeing in the few areas, the very few, mind you, nerfs that we're seeing in the 2024 Player's Handbook are only things that were really outliers, like Paladin and Smites and Druid and Wild Shape. Kind of really the two instances of things that were like really, really powerful and potentially out of band power level wise for what they wanted. And those are the only things that were kind of brought down. I feel like almost every other aspect of everything else in this book is a buff in some form or another. And that's not to say that other buffs aren't happening in those classes that are getting the nerfs, because they are. It's just this thing is ultimately, when you look at it in a pure power standpoint, a nerf, because it is weaker ultimately than it was previously for one reason or another. But in reality, when you look at it on a table black and white compared to other classes, it is on par power level with some of the other classes' abilities. It's just weaker than its previous version, which arguably may have been too strong in the long run. All right, let's see what you guys have to say over here. All right, yeah. Bits of the druid need adjusting. Infinite wild shape is infinite low form. Yep, there we go. The damage to the moon druid carried over between forms. That will probably have changed. I always like to give the option for my druids to wild shape into the summon beast template. Yeah, so like I said, what I kind of want to level set here, and as we talked about, like, yeah, if I'm gonna call out stuff if I see things are like pretty rough, in my opinion. But like I'm ultimately trying to be positive on this for just the sake of not shitting on this. There's plenty of negativity out there um for people who want to seek that negativity. They say that's largely most people's reactions to these. And I get it. And again, as a paladin player, and I don't want to keep harping on paladin because everything comes back to paladin, it seems. Um, but like, yeah, it sucks. The changes. 100% it sucks. I get it. I don't want that either. But I also recognize that paladins were crazy, crazy strong. Same thing with moon druids. Same thing with druids in general, right? You're going to tell me that it wasn't nice to just be able to, even as like a non-moon druid, to be able to be like, well, I just got a sack of 30 hit points out of nowhere for an action, especially given the changes like that wild shape is a bonus action for everybody now. That's huge implications, changes. And if they kept it the way it was, that's wild, right? Bonus action wild shape for everybody, and now you could just be like, yeah, I know like the black bear's not that great, or the brown bear, or whatever you could wild shape into. You were just like, that's 35 extra hit points. Even if I don't do anything in that form, that might keep me in the fight longer because I'll shape into that, have that chunk of hit points, and then if I get chunked down back to base form, hey, at least I tanked that fireball so I can keep staying in the fight. And there's something to that. And maybe there's a middle ground, kind of like we talked about with the paladin. Maybe they went a little too hard. Maybe there's a middle ground that can be found in homebrew that maybe will come and become the accepted thing. And there may be a way to do that here for the druid as well. And I already have some thoughts on that. But yeah, I just want to kind of level set that up front. That yeah, ultimately, if you're a diehard druid player, you're probably going to be upset by that. But here's another thing. Now, let's talk non-moon druids here for a second. How many times are you wild shaping non-moon druids? Let's be real. Especially in the newer subclasses that allow you to do other cool things with your wild shape. How often are you wild shaping into an animal? In my experience, having run multiple games for multiple druids over multiple years, uh the when they're a non-moon druid, very early on, they will wild shape because it is a viable combat option for them. They might do more damage, they have limited spell slots, and it's a way to stay in the fight longer by being like a werewolf, a wolf, or a snake, or whatever, right? So they do that. But then very quickly, when their spells start to get more powerful, or especially if there's something like a wildfire druid, which has a different use for wild shape, they will almost never wild shape into an animal unless it's for some form of transportation or scouting, right? Turn into the spider so you can scuttle into the, the thing maybe unseen. Turn into the giant eagle so you can pick up another character and fly them somewhere else where you couldn't before. That's what it ultimately becomes, which arguably is almost an out of combat reconnaissance thing, less a combat effective one. So it doesn't really matter what your hit points are, if it's just to fly from point A to point B, or just to spy on somebody to get information you might not have been able to get. Now, yeah, do my moon druids end up turning into wild shaping more often, as much as they did in early levels as they do at late levels? Yes. But I've also had players go one way where one wouldn't do it till they were out of spell slots. They'd blow all their spell slots and then wild shape as a backup plan. Or other ones who would cast spells first and then immediately wild shape so they could keep the concentration up and then while wild shaping. So, there's both sides of it, but I ultimately think this is a relatively good change overall. I think it does it well. Moon druids are still better at wild shaping, but ultimately I've been talking here for about 20 minutes and we still haven't actually watched the video yet. Let's go ahead and see what you guys have to say while I turn my headphones on, because it's the second time my headphones have gone into power save mode to turn off because I've been talking so much with no content coming through it. All right. let's continue with the actual video.
You now have, as a druid, a brand new feature to select at first level, Primal Order. And inside Primal Order, you get to make a choice. And that is whether you're going to be what's called a Warden, emphasizing sort of having more armor and being able to use martial weapons, or are you going to pick Magician to
Do not like the title Magician, personally. I do like this concept of providing these characters options, right? Do you want to be a more melee, fighty, armored kind of druid, or do you want to be more a spellcasty druid? That's a pretty cool feature for them to have up front. The name Magician is kind of weird, though.
lean more in the nature magician direction? This choice point really gets at the fact that the druid, going all the way back to
Love the art, by the way. Just throw that out there.
its origins in first edition, has always had a bit of a split identity. There has been this sort of melee weapon using path as well as a full spellcasting path. And so what we've decided to do, and we did a similar thing in the new version of the cleric, we've made it so that we forefront that choice, and you get to decide as a player of the druid which side you want to lean more on.
This is like a really small nitpicky thing, but I also kind of wish we could get this change retroactively added to Baldur's Gate 3. I know there's no way that's going to happen, but I would love that as well.
And so if you...
Sage is so much... So I like Shaman personally. I don't know if that, given where WotC's like opinions are on changing things, I don't know if Shaman has like connotations to it that they wouldn't want to go the route of Shaman. But Sage is so much cleaner and better sounding than Magician. The only reason they may not want to use Sage is Sage, I think, is a background name. But Magician just feels wrong, you know? Warden, I love Warden. Warden is a fantastic choice for the more bulwarky style, like defender type. But Magician, it just feels wrong. Sage would be fine. I think Shaman probably would be okay as well. There's got to be some other ones that I'm not thinking of that would also be just like another name for like a mage. Even mage sounds better than magician. I know mage typically has like an arcane connotation to it, but even still, yeah.
Pick Warden, you're going to get proficiency with martial weapons as well as with medium armor, whereas if you pick Magician, you're going to get an extra cantrip, and you also gain a benefit when making intelligence, arcana, or nature checks.
This is almost identical to the one we're going to see on the cleric. It's just the cleric gets this obviously on religion checks. But I really like that they gave them martial weapon proficiency because that's new, right? Previously, the druid had medium armor proficiency and shields and like a curated list of different weapons they could use. The change to making it just martial weapons is actually kind of really nice. Now, again, you're not getting weapon mastery as a druid unless you take it via a feat. But it's just kind of cool to be able to be a druid with a battle axe. Like that's kind of cool. It's different, right? Than what we and it's not I mean, you could have always been in the past been like a dwarven druid, right? And then had a battle axe, and that's fine. But and so like obviously you could do that, but it's just a different like mental picture in my mind is the things you can do with having a martial weapon proficiency. And it's such a simple thing, but I like it a lot. Flavorful, yes, thank you, very good. Hedge mage, ooh, yes, hedge mage. Sounds good. Tyler, I think geomancer has a specific connotation to like earth-based magic, in my opinion. I get where you're going with geomancy, though. I think geomancy has just a specific like rock and earth-based magic. Also, something that is drastically missing from 5th edition, and honestly, you're not really going to see much of it. But like, there's like not a lot of earth-based spells, right? Like, there's a couple, right? You've got like Maximilian's Earthen Grasp and a couple of things out there, but there's not a lot of earth-based magic. You do have a lot of like lightning and fire and water and cold spells, but not a lot of earth spells. Mystic, it kind of gives me more arcana vibes, but sage I think is probably the way to go. Oh, yep, sage is also a plant. You're right. That could give you a little more naturey connotation to it. Um, but and to your point, Tyler, I they pretty much said this towards the latter half of what were kind of existing 2014, that they basically gave up on the metal. Even Pathfinder gave up on that, like the concept of druids being able to wear metal armor. They're done with that. It was just a legacy thing that was held over from older editions. I don't think they ultimately care about druids in metal armor anymore anyway. And honestly, it led to like weird things in older editions of your druid being at like trying to be a specific druid or worship a specific deity because that deity would allow you to wear metal. I mean, hell, like I remember, God, was it there was a special kind of Warforged that you had to be in 3.5 to be able to be a druid because Warforged are made out of metal. So there was a Warforged that you could get that was made out of like ironwood, which is just a type of wood, so that they could be a druid. And it's just like this is so many hoops to jump through to just play the thing you want to play. So I think they're just gonna drop the metal armor nonsense completely, and I'm here for it.
And this benefit is getting to add your wisdom modifier to those checks. So in a way, you're getting to use 2 ability scores when you make those checks.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because you're
So
So yeah, this is he's gonna explain it, but if you're making a nature check as a magician, druid, you're going to add your intelligence and your wisdom to those checks, which is very nice, especially if you find a way somewhere else to get expertise in that. Again, this is all going to be dependent on how much your DM um, makes nature checks a useful thing for you. Because honestly, I think we've all probably been there where you might take like a specific intelligence based knowledge, style, skill proficiency, and it's just never used, or it has no real the study action will help with that. Which is a thing they added in one of the earlier Unearthed Arcanas, where you can make the study action, which is where you basically make a knowledge check essentially. Because they had the search action and the study action, I think they're called. The search action was like previously just used for making perception checks. It's now used for making a handful of checks like search, I think investigate, survival, things like that. Whereas the study action is more mental based, so arcana checks, history checks, and so on. And you can make those in combat. And like even the fact that certain feats allow you to make those actions as a bonus action. Um, but again, it is still kind of dependent on your DM to make that useful for you. But still being able to combo intelligence and wisdom in one check, and then especially like I said, if you could snag expertise, whether a feat or otherwise, in that, you now could possibly have double your proficiency bonus plus intelligence plus wisdom on your nature checks, which, depending, like I said, on the viability of that in your campaigns, could be wild.
they stack.
they
Yeah.
stack. So like if you're a magician druid and you make an intelligence nature check, you're adding both your intelligence modifier and your wisdom
Oh, that's
modifier.
amazing. I love that.
And that's really focusing in on the
Nice art here. Druid casting some healing magics here on their barbarian friend.
fact that this is a druid who is all about not only nature magic, but knowledge about the natural world and about magic itself. At first level, we've also enhanced the druidic feature. This feature used to teach you the secret language of druids, which is called druidic, but this now also gives you speak with animals, because we wanted to, right there at first level, we wanted druids to have an easier path to doing this very iconic thing for druids, which is conversing with critters.
And that is, I think, is also pulled directly from Baldur's Gate 3, is just give them speak with animals. Like, it's so simple, right? Why? Because especially because Druidic had this like weird, so much of it was like based on how your DM wants to go about it. Like, you can communicate simple ideas and gestures to animals by blah 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 blah, and it's like, just give me a mechanic. And you know what they did? They said, hell, we'll give you a better option: speak with animals. Great, love that.
And in the art for this class, you see a druid there happily surrounded by all of his animal friends. Now, the spellcasting feature is also still at first level for druids, and the druid spell list, like all of our spellcasting classes, has been reviewed, expanded, and this list benefits from the additional spells that are in this player's handbook. Now, at second level, the new...
Hang on, you guys did want to see, let's just I'll pull up the latest playtest here, and I'll throw it over here on this screen, just to see how because I think the Druidic, yeah, here it is, ready? You were asking about how it is. Look right here. Druidic. This is from playtest 8, which was the most recent playtest before what we're talking about now. Now, again, consider that this is the playtest, and also consider that August 1st at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, I will be no longer under embargo for the copy that I already have, so I will be able to make full-blown videos on this. But take a look, right? You know Druidic, the secret language of druids, this is ancient language, blah, blah, blah. You always have the speak with animals spell prepared. So that's just how it is. And if I recall correctly, speak with animals is a ritual spell, and you always have it prepared. That is so much better. I do see you out there saying, what about speak with plants? A reasonable question as well. I would argue speak with animals. Honestly, they're both useful. I only wonder if the only reason we get speak with animals at level 1 is because it's a level 1 spell, where I believe speak with plants is a level 3 spell, which honestly never made a lot of sense to me. Why is it that much harder to talk to a plant than it is to talk to an animal? I mean, maybe it's because they're more alive in the more physical sense, right? Like plants are alive, as we know, but not quite the same as like an animal. One thing that Pathfinder did that I really like is when you kind of are a druid in Pathfinder, they also did a similar thing where they kind of changed the way things worked at the level 1 druid, where you basically, instead of getting very similar to what D&D is doing, but they actually give you an option in Pathfinder to choose either speak with animals or speak with plants to kind of further delineate your druid. Do you want to be more focused on animals or more focused on like plants and greenery? Granted, there is a lot more options in a Pathfinder druid to focus more on plants than there are in Dungeons and Dragons to focus on plants. But that would be kind of either what I would do is give Druidic an upgrade at like 5th level when you would get access to speak with plants and have that be the change. Like you now also always have speak with plants available. Similar to this, like Druidic, and then you would add like a little text here or add Druidic improvement as a level 5 ability that says, you know, your knowledge of the Druidic secret language has improved. You always have the speak with plants spell prepared. And again, I don't think speak with plants is a ritual, so having it always prepared is fine because of the fact that like you're still hard limited by the spell slots. So regardless of how many things you have always prepared, you're still hard limited by the number of slots you have. And especially if it's not a ritual, then you have to spend a slot to do it. Or you could even make it a ritual and say that it's always prepared. I really don't care. I don't think it's going to be super game breaking to have speak with plants always prepared. So again, if we're going to make a homebrew tweak to the druid, that would probably be what I would do is at level 5 when you would normally have access to speak with plants, just grant them speak with plants always prepared, or go the Pathfinder route at level 1 and give them the opportunity to cast either or. The only issue would be, again, if speak with plants is not a ritual, being able to cast it at level 1 means you're allowed to cast a level 3 spell for free at level 1 when you don't have those slots, which again might be part of the reason why it's just speak with animals. So I'm going to lean into at level 5 when speak with plants becomes a spell you have access to, just give your druids that for free, always prepared. Like not because here it's not like they don't get to cast it once without spending spell slot. It's just always prepared for them. And I think that's a simple change that I would make for my druids as well, kind of tapping more into that nature. If you could talk to animals and you've been spending all this time training your druidic powers, makes sense that now speaking with plants is also second nature to you as well. Let's go back to the video.
Keeps coming because we have majorly improved wild shape, which is such an iconic feature for druids. This ability.
Again, be prepared because the majorly improving is subjective and a lot of people have issues with this, but let's go ahead and listen to it.
Ability to harness primal magic to adopt a beast form. Right off the bat, the major enhancement here is all druids can now wild shape as a bonus action.
Right.
This used
Arguably a huge, powerful change, right? We can all agree with that.
to be a feature that belonged to the Circle of the Moon subclass, and we wanted to make it easier for all druids, regardless of subclass, to transform into a beast should they decide to use their wild shape in that way.
That's amazing.
And this leads in, how I phrased it, into the other new thing at level 2, which is the wild companion feature, because we also wanted to give people other things to use their wild shape on. Wild shape,
This is from
of course,
Tasha's
is
Cauldron.
fun to use to turn into animals, but sometimes a druid player doesn't want their druid to be turning into animals, and so we wanted to give you other things you could use your wild shape for, and Wild Companion right away gives you that, and that allows you to use one of your uses of wild shape to cast the Find Familiar spell, because we wanted to make it easier for druids to have a critter friend with them. This is a feature that we introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but it is now migrated into the core so that now all druids have this option.
Perfect.
Now, there are other enhancements inside Wild Shape. In addition to it now being a bonus action for all druids, we have also now made it so that druids can continue to speak while they are in a wild shape form.
Big change.
Because we've really embraced the fact that when a druid adopts a wild shape, they're not literally an animal. They are this very magical person, this druid who is simply appearing in an animal form. And so we wanted you to really be able to retain your character a bit more while you're in one of these animal shapes, so you can still participate in social encounters, even if you're there as a cat. We didn't want druids to feel like that when they shapeshift, they're now suddenly excluding themselves from certain types of encounters.
Again, arguably a big, just a simple kind of passive adjustment, right? We've got bonus action wild shape for everybody. We've got talking while in wild shape. One thing he didn't mention is that they did increase the number of uses of wild shape. I think it goes up to 4 now, as opposed to it was previously 2 per short rest. It is now 4 at, again, granted at 17, right? It does take a while to get there, but the third usage comes online at level 6. And I believe it is, let's just maybe double check on this. You regain 1 use when you finish a short rest and get all uses back when you finish a long rest. So you will have more, and you'll still get 1 back every short rest, but you'll get them all back on a long rest. We've seen this kind of been a shift you'll see in some of these things, like Channel Divinity is a similar thing, right? You have more uses of Channel Divinity. You get 1 back on a short rest, but all back on a long rest. So you're not just totally resetting all of those abilities in the short rest, which is fine by me. I think that's a simple change, and because Channel Divinity and, again, also Wild Shape can be very powerful depending on what kind of subclass is using it, what abilities you have to use it for. So I'm fine with that change, but that's something that they didn't mention that's worth mentioning as well. Wait a minute. What if you could burn a Wild Shape to cast a Speak With spell you have prepared? I mean, that could be an option that you allow people to do, burn a wild shape to do it. I feel like it's honestly not that hard to spend. I mean, Speak With Animals is a ritual spell. You don't have to spend any slots for that, so. Usually when the druid in my campaign I'm in, they will tug on the character, and I'll cast Speak With Animals to save a spell slot. Yeah. So this just helps with that. And honestly, like, for those saying, like, I used to turn into animals to not speak, reminder that to the general public, outside of the characters in the party, a talking animal is definitely cause for alarm, right? Like, that's not a normal thing. So that will alert people. So it may be of benefit for you to not talk while in animal form, but consider that.
We go up in the levels with the druid, you're going to keep seeing new features, because we didn't just add in that choice point I mentioned before in primal order at first level. You also then get carry-on options later on. So when you get up to level 7, there is the Elemental Fury feature, where you again get to decide, do you want to lean more in the direction of spellcasting or in the direction of weapon use? Now, one of the fun things that we did here is this later choice is not determined by your choice at first level. You can actually mix and match.
Yeah.
So even if you decided to go more the spellcasting route at first level, you could instead go the Primal Strike direction at level 7, or you could keep going in the spellcasting direction with potent spellcasting. Then at level 15, you get improved Elemental Fury, and this improves whichever one of those options you chose for Elemental Fury at level 7. Now, before both of those, there's another new feature in the form of Wild Resurgence, which allows you now some flexibility in terms of how you use your spell slots and your wild shape uses, where specifically you can give yourself a wild shape use by expending a spell slot. So if you've ever played a druid and you've been in the situation where I'd really love to shapeshift again, but I'm out of wild shape uses, but I have all these spell slots sitting around, well, now you have the option of converting an unexpended spell slot into a wild shape use. But it also, once per day, can go in the other direction, where you can expend a use of your wild shape to give yourself a level 1 spell slot. Now, the farming spell slots for wild shape uses, you can just keep doing that until you've run out of spell slots.
Yeah.
But the other direction of taking a wild shape use and turning it into a spell slot, that you can do just once and then need to complete a long rest before you do it again.
This is very.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into that from, again, the Unearthed Arcana. So they didn't really talk about the wild shape, and maybe they will when they get to Moon Druid, but you still are limited. There's a number here for figuring out your number of known forms, and you're still kind of, limited by like the fly speed. And they removed the swim speed, which was a really weird thing to have previously. So swim speed is not a determining factor for you anymore. You can turn into an aquatic creature from the start. It's just fly speed is limited till 8th level, at which point the CR you can turn into goes up to 1. Now, one thing they didn't really touch on is the changes to the transformation, and that also may be because it's the same as what was in the Unearthed Arcana here. So you can take a look here, right? You retain the following things when you wild shape. Your hit points. This is the one that pisses people off because you don't just get a sack of new hit points with your animal form. You stay in your druid's hit points. And I think, I mean, if we want to even dive into more like the role play or flavor aspect of things, especially them kind of changing the fact that like you can still speak because you're arguably not an animal, you're just a magical person taking on the form of an animal, makes more sense story-wise that way, for you to retain your hit points and not just gather new hit points, but you do still get some other stuff. So you retain your hit points, your hit dice, your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores, any class features, languages, and feats you have. So consider that, right? You might, whatever feats you have may be present as well. You also retain your skill and saving throw proficiencies and use your proficiency bonus for them, in addition to gaining those from the creature. So if the creature's form has proficiency in stealth and you don't have proficiency in stealth, while wild shaped, you are considered to have proficiency in stealth. If the creature has the same proficiency bonus, remind you because that is shown on the stat block now, as you, and the bonus in its stat block is higher than yours, you use the creature's bonus instead. So even if you have stealth and the creature has a better stealth than you, you would use that creature's stealth instead of your own, therefore giving you a little bit more benefits in that as well. It obviously, you don't get legendary or lair actions. And then it says, when you assume a wild shape form, you gain a number of temporary hit points equal to your druid level. So this is sort of the compromise in that rather than getting a sack full of hit points, you get temporary hit points equal to your druid level. Now, that's not a lot, let's be honest, right? It's temporary hit points. That means they also can't be healed because they're temporary hit points. And it's going to be a small amount. But like I said, I'm okay with this because I feel like more often than not, especially later on in the game, if you're not a moon druid, you're going to choose to do this for reconnaissance or for overland travel. So a couple extra temporary hit points is fine by me. So there you go. Now, they also says you can't spell cast while in wild shape form, but cast transforming does not break your concentration, and you can continue to use spells you've already concentrated on when you transform. And that makes sense. That was kind of always the way it was, but it was never officially codified. Now it is, just to remove confusion and possible discrepancies between player and DM on that. Well, there's a difference between, I think we could all make the agreement that there's a difference between casting a spell and then also speaking, right? Anybody can talk, but not anybody can cast a spell when they say the magic words. So there's more to it. And I think a lot of your magic is being used to funnel into your transformation, not into your casting. And honestly, you will get to do that at later levels. They didn't want to just give you all of this outright, and I'm fine with that. I think the fact that you don't drop out of wild shape when you run out of temporary hit points is pretty good. Lets you use lower CR creatures in combat. That's the other thing people are not considering as well. Like, if you turn into a form that has a benefit for one reason or another in like a combat scenario or in a flight scenario, that's the other one, right? Especially when we're talking about how, like, you might turn into a giant eagle because a giant eagle can fly. And it really sucked when you were flying around as a giant eagle and the DM hit you with a fireball and it knocked you out of giant eagle form, so you plummet to the earth and die. Well, now you don't. You could get hit with that fireball. You could lose the temporary hit points granted to you by your transformation, which will help lessen the blow a little bit. But also, you don't drop form when those temporary hit points are gone. It just eats up your regular hit points. And that is a double-edged sword, right? You're not gaining that sack of hit points you had isn't saving you, right, from the damage, because the damage is still going to hit your regular form when those temp HP are gone. But you have the opportunity to stay in that form and continue doing whatever you want to do while in that form. So for certain instances, it's definitely worth it to not be automatically booted back to base character form from whatever transformation you are in. Now, the only thing that is worth mentioning, and I'm not sure off the top of my head if this changed in the final version or not, is notice it says you retain your class features, your languages, and your feats. It does not say that you retain your species features, which means in theory, if you were resistant to fire as a tiefling, let's say, and then you transform into a tiger, the tiger wouldn't be resistant to fire, but your base form would, as written. Now, maybe, like I said, maybe that's changed to clarify further in the final version in the book. But as written, you are not retaining the abilities, which also means in theory you're not retaining dark vision, right? Because dark vision is a thing that comes from your species, not from your class. Although some class features do give you dark vision depending on the class. In theory, you do not retain those. You are taking on the form of the creature, and that creature didn't have fire resistance. I would argue in my games, I'm just going to allow that to transfer because it seems silly to me to not. So I'm going to allow, like, if I have a fire resistant tiefling and they turn into a tiger, the tiger is fire resistant. I think that's a pretty simple homebrew. If you had dark vision in your base form and then you turn into a creature that doesn't have dark vision, you should still get the dark vision, in my opinion. Again, but then, like, it's, you could make the arguments both ways. Like, well, if you're turned into a bat, the bat doesn't have dark vision, but it has blind sight. Should I keep the blind sight or should I keep my dark vision? Well, you probably should keep the blind sight because that's the whole point of turning into like a bat in that instance. So there's some back and forth there, and that obviously could be, like I said, and this is all speculation here because this is what's in the 8th Unearthed Arcana, not the final product of the book, which might change things, and they haven't really mentioned it one way or another, but that is something worth considering. Miles Main brings up the fact that too, right, getting knocked out of, if you're underwater in an aquatic form and you get knocked out of your aquatic form, now you got to start holding your breath because you were previously capable of breathing underwater. Something else to consider. Now, I wanted to talk about the other features they mentioned there as well. They mentioned Elemental Fury and improved elemental fury. So this is the level 7 ability he mentioned, where you have one of the two following options: potent spellcasting. Add your wisdom modifier to the damage you deal with any druid cantrip, or primal strike once on each of your turns when you hit a creature with an attack roll using a weapon or a beast form's attack in wild shape. You can cause the target to take an extra d8 of either cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. This is really nice because, again, as they said, it allows you to focus, if you want to, more on the spellcasting side, adding your wisdom modifier to that cantrip damage, or it's also using a weapon or a beast form's attack. So if you go primal strike, you could focus more on a melee, like weapon based, and it says a weapon. It doesn't even, I said melee, it doesn't say that, it says a weapon. So if you are a druid who chose earlier on to be a warden and get proficiency in martial weapons, and you now have access to a longbow, you could choose to have your longbow deal an extra d8 cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. And I bring that up now because remember how good that is when it comes for us to talk about the ranger in a little while, because that is arguably better than the entire ranger class. But we'll get there. That's a little sneak preview for you. Anyway, and then at 15, you get improved elemental fury. When you cast a druid cantrip with a range of 10 feet or greater, the spell's range increases to 300 feet, by 300 feet. So if you're casting druid cantrips that had a range of 10 feet or greater, so any kind of your ranged druid cantrips, they bump up by 300 feet. So if you were casting a druid cantrip that had a range of 100 feet, it's now 400 feet, which is pretty wild for a cantrip. And then again, primal strike, which allows you to once per turn deal an extra d8 damage, it jumps up to 2d8. So that's actually really good, because you could, if you're going to focus on your transformations, like say you are a moon druid, this would mean that while in moon druid form, once a turn, you could stack on an extra 2d8 damage on top of your hits, which is pretty strong considering the moon druid already has some good capabilities for damaging while transformed. Or again, it could just be done with a weapon. And then they also mentioned here Wild Resurgence, which was the level 5 ability, which I really like, right? If you have no uses of Wild Shape left, you can give yourself one use by expending a spell slot as no action, doable once per turn. In addition, you can expend one use of Wild Shape, no action required, to give yourself a level 1 spell slot once per long rest. So again, this may have changed slightly in the final version to be slightly different. But basically, you're able to churn once per long rest a wild shape use into a spell slot, which makes sense because, again, you can get wild shape, one wild shape slot back on a short rest. So you could infinitely farm level 1 spell slots this way if it wasn't limited to the long rest. But according to Jeremy, as you heard, you can infinitely farm for wild shape slots. So if you had things that allowed you to do different stuff with your wild shape, you could constantly burn spell slots to get wild shape slots, and you're not limited in that, just once per turn. So you could have a fat stack of wild shape options, especially if you have something that lets you burn a wild shape to do a cool thing. You're unlimited in your ability to do that. So let's keep going here, see what else they have to say. Moving on.
Juicy with Elemental Fury, because as you said, you're adding your Wisdom modifier to a Druid cantrip's damage, or you're choosing to get extra damage when you're using Primal Strike in a melee form. And that continues into improved Elemental Fury, where your range of your cantrips significantly increases by 300 feet, making a really nasty spell sniper, and then also Primal Strikes, the damage keeps going up. So you are more in the fight as this druid, and it just gets better and better, and you keep on getting to make that choice multiple times.
By the way, one reason in improved Elemental Fury we increased the range so much there, if you choose potent spellcasting for your druid cantrips, is at level 18 you're going to get beast spells, which allows you to cast your spells even when you're in a wild shape form. And we wanted you to be able to easily use your cantrips once you get that at range while you're flying around.
Yeah, it's like a giant eagle. You're just like, that's perfect.
Now,
see, that's interesting that they actually took that into account, like the reason why the cantrips. This is actually arguably more interesting to me, having kind of seen what was in the Unearthed Arcana, and again, having that peek behind the curtain of what the final product kind of looks like. I'm more interested in the design philosophy as to how we got there. And that's really interesting that they took the time to think about, like, yeah, at high levels, you might be zipping around in the sky, and it sure sucks that you can't do anything, but at least your cantrips will work because they have this extra range. I kind of like that.
Now, at level 20, the Archdruid feature has been majorly enhanced. First, whenever you roll initiative, if you have no uses of wild shape left, you get a use back.
Right.
But before I was talking about that conversion of wild shape uses into spell slots and how before you could do it just once per day. Well, now Archdruid has the Nature Magician component where you get an even better version of that. On top of us keeping the old fantasy of the druidic longevity of once you've reached the point of where you're an Archdruid, your aging, basically slows to a crawl, and you're almost sort of you're like a treant, where you can hang around in the woods for many decades.
And it's always such a nice narrative hook, especially for the end of a campaign. If you're playing a druid and you get to 20th level, because you're the character that might see, in like kind of the post story, right? The epilogue. You're the character that might see everyone grow old and pass away and see their children grow up and their grandchildren grow up, and you can kind of be the narrative hook for what happens after the story is over.
And so what all of these new elements bring to the druid is you have way more control now as a druid player to chart your course.
Yeah.
Whether again you want to focus more on spellcasting, on weapon use, or a combination of the two. It's up for you to decide. And you also get to weave into that how you want to use your wild shape. Are you going to have a wild companion? You have more options as a druid than ever before.
And you also have a new cantrip, Starry Wisp.
Yes, the druid, like all of our spellcasting classes, gets to enjoy some brand new spells. And in the druid's case, there's
looks like maybe an entangle, right, or a plant growth.
Not only Starry Wisp, but also the new Elementalism cantrip, which allows the druid and others who have it to shape elements in very.
Elementalism is amazing because it basically took 4 cantrips and turned it into one. It took basically Shape Water, Gust, Control Flames, and Move Earth or Mold Earth, whatever the cantrip one was, and just made them all one cantrip called Elementalism. And it's just so much cleaner, right? Like, rather than having to take 4 different cantrips to do simple elemental based stuff, it's now one. And again, cantrips like that are only as useful as you are creative and as much as your DM is willing to let you do. But it makes sense to me. Oh, and just for point of reference, Archdruid, at least in the Unearthed Arcana, Nature Magician says, you can convert uses of Wild Shape into a spell slot, choose a number of unexpended uses of Wild Shape and convert them into a single spell slot, with each contributing 2 spell levels. For example, you must finish a long rest before you can do so again. For example, if you convert 2 uses of Wild Shape, you produce a 4th level spell slot. Reminder that at level 20, you do have 4 uses of Wild Shape. So in theory, if you burnt all 4 uses of your Wild Shape, if my math is correct, you could do a level 8 spell slot back, which would be crazy, but still very cool. All right, let's keep going because they're about to get into subclasses.
Various ways. And Starry Wisp, going back to it, is a really nice ranged cantrip for druids.
Let's talk about the Circle of the Moon.
So the Circle of the Moon is the subclass of the 4 that is most concerned about Wild Shape.
Yeah.
This is the subclass that allows you to take the utility of Wild Shape and give it a reliable combat dimension. Because most druids, they certainly could use Wild Shape for fighting, but often they're going to be better off relying on their spells in combat.
Oh, Dragon Drake, you might have hit the jackpot. Convert a spell slot into a Wild Shape. Burn all 5 Wild Shapes for a 9th level spell slot. Yeah, I think that works. Oh, man, the fact that you could farm on... Oh, no. We heard from the man himself you could unlimited farm Wild Shape slot. Oh, no. Oh, my God. He literally says in this video, you could unlimited farm Wild Shape slots as much as you want. But then at level 20, the fact that you can convert slots into oh god. Yeah, you basically, in theory, could have unlimited, almost near unlimited 9th level spell slots. Oh, wow. Yeah. He said you could. I mean, let's see. No. Not at level 20. At level 20, you could do it as much as you want. Isn't it? Is it as much as you want, or is it once per long rest? Oh, sorry. But it is once per long rest. It is once per long rest, so it's not unlimited. Not as bad as I thought. It is. That's not what you want to see. That's you guys. It is once per long rest. Okay, so we got to consider that. You must finish a long rest before you can do so again. So you are limited in that. Now, let's see wild shape. Stay in this form. Okay. You can use a wild shape twice. It's hard to say because it says you gain additional uses when you reach certain druid levels, as shown in the wild shape column of the druid table. So it doesn't like hard say that that is the maximum amount that you can have. It says that you can have 4, like that's the total you have, but it doesn't, like there's not language that says it's a maximum of 4. I mean, either way, right? The fact that you could convert 4 uses at level 20 into an extra 8th level slot is still nuts because of the fact that you could burn 1st level slots to get all your wild shapes back if you really wanted to. Now, the question is this kind of like a coffee lock situation like we talked about, where, you could take, in theory, the concept of the coffee lock is you could just generate so many like sorcery points and spell slots back and forth by converting without taking a long rest. Oh, nope, here it is. No, you can give yourself 1. No, if you have no uses of wild shape left, you can give yourself 1 by expending a spell slot. So there's no official language that states can you go above the hard limit of, like, what we're assuming is a hard limit of 4 because that's what the table says. There is nothing that states officially, like I was looking to see if it says 1 of your expended uses, but it says if you have none left. So you'd have to have 0 left, but then I guess you could, oh, I guess maybe not. No, that might do it. That's it. If you have no uses left, you can give yourself 1, but then once you have 1, you can't give yourself more. Okay, so no, unless what we're seeing here in the Unearthed Arcana is different than the final wording in the book, which it could be. Could be. We don't know. I don't think so, because it sounds like they might have already prevented our shenanigans that we've already come up with, which would have been wild. So it doesn't seem like we're going to have unlimited 9th level spell slots. It doesn't seem like we're going to be able to get a second 9th level spell slot out of this. But I'm pretty sure clerics can kind of get a second 9th level spell slot by using divine intervention, so it wouldn't be unheard of. But the fact that it does say when you have no uses left means that you can't just keep doing it, which is why it's also limited to once per turn, so you can't just like build up a fat stack of them. He did say farm infinite number of wild shapes, but that's just, I guess, infinite number of wild shapes 1 at a time. So unfortunately, no. Our wild, crazy ideas of getting so many wild shapes that we could just unlimitedly use 9th level spells, or even a second 9th level spell in and of itself, seems as though that is impossible. That being said, you could spend all 4 uses to get an extra 8th level spell slot, which, let's not knock an 8th level spell. And then you could take a short rest to get, or I guess, no, what you would do is spend all 4, get an extra 8th level slot. Then you would use Wild Resurgence to get 1 slot back, then take a short rest and get another slot back, so you could have 2. Like, that would be the way if you wanted to do the 2 8th level spells. So you wouldn't have unlimited wild shapes, but you would have, if you're burning Wild Resurgence to get a slot back, and then short rest, that would get you back up to 2. And then again, Nature Druid, Evergreen Wild Shape is you'll get 1 back So you'll have them. It would just be like if you wanted to burn all of them to just do the power of an extra 8th level slot early on. Um, so yeah, not nearly as broken as we were making it out to be, which would have been a wild follow-up video to make if we'd figured that out. But no, not as crazy. Once we kind of actually go through it, but you could, like I said, at the very least, get yourself an extra 8th level slot. And again, that's assuming you want something that high. You could do a 6th level slot or a 4th level slot, or depending on what you want to do with it, without having to burn through every single wild shape that you have. But either way, still, yes, again, as you say, Tyler, still incredibly solid, just not broken, which is very true. All right, let's get back into the video.
And using wild shape largely for utility purposes, whether it's to fly or climb or sneak into a place. Circle of the Moon, though, is all about changing into a beast form and fighting in that form. And so with that in mind, we have introduced a number of enhancements in Circle of the Moon. We've made it so that in their Circle Forms feature, their AC is more reliable than it was before, because before,
nice.
when they transformed into a beast, they had to use the beast's AC, and sometimes the beast's armor class was actually lower than the druid's armor class. And because we want you to be able to comfortably keep fighting in your beast forms, even at higher level, we introduced this new ability to use either an AC equal to 13 plus your wisdom mod, or the AC and the beast, whichever one is higher, so that you can hopefully withstand those hits in your beast form. You also gain temporary hit points now when you transform. Now, this is true actually of all druids when they shapeshift using wild shape.
Oh, here it is.
But the Circle of the Moon druid gets even more temporary hit points. And the gain of temporary hit points in wild shape replaces what it used to do with beast hit points, because it used to be that in wild shape that you would transform into a critter and essentially have a new hit point pool. And then when that critter's hit point pool got zeroed out, you would then move back to your other hit point pool. That actually created a number of issues for other parts of the game system, because there are a number of things in the game that are triggered by someone dropping to 0 hit points. And
this was a big deal back in the day. Was like, would Finger of Death kill you because you're dropping to 0 hit points, but it's the animal form dropping to 0 hit points, not me. But like Disintegrate, right? You drop to 0 hit points and you turn into a pile of dust. And there was a lot of back and forth on official rulings on whether that happened when the wild shape form dropped to 0 hit points, because technically it did. Therefore, it should turn to dust, but the druid still had hit points, which is what he's getting at right here.
And we didn't actually want those things to be triggered when a druid's beast form reaches 0. So we've made that system issue go away by now having wild shape simply give you some temporary hit points when you transform, but you keep using, as a druid, your own hit points.
And you can maintain that form using your own hit points.
Yes.
So when those temporary hit points go away, it doesn't knock you out of the form.
So wild shape now also, for all druids, lasts longer than it used to, because you used to be knocked out of the form when you lost the hit points of the creature, and that combo, of course, still is not the case because you don't have that creature's hit points anymore. You simply get temporary hit points, and as you mentioned, you are not knocked out of wild shape when you lose those temporary hit points. The Circle of the Moon now also has a feature called Circle of the Moon spells that gives them a list of spells that they can cast even while they are in their beast forms. This is a fun new enhancement for them. They used to have the ability, while they were in beast form in 2014, to heal themselves while they were in beast form. We decided to supercharge that by replacing that feature with a list of spells, including Cure Wounds, so they still have the option of casting a healing spell on themselves while they're in beast form. But now they also, of course, have the option with that spell to heal somebody else. They can also cast Moonbeam, Starry Wisp, and at higher levels, Conjure Animals, Fount of Moonlight, which is another brand new spell, and Mass Cure Wounds. We did this because we wanted there to be also more of the moon flavor in Circle of the Moon. And so you'll see throughout that you're not only transforming, but you are essentially illuminated by this lunar magic. And the reason why we've always associated the moon with the shape-shifting of the subclass is partly because of the classic folkloric thing of the moon, causing werewolves and others to transform.
Yeah.
And that's why those two elements are combined in this subclass.
So I just wanted to talk about that too, because I think that that's really important as another kind of nice benefit that moon druids get, which is this right here. Circle of the Moon spells, Cure Wounds, Moonbeam, Starry Wisp, Vampiric Touch, Font of Moonlight, and Dawn. I think Moonbeam is actually wrong here because Moonbeam is or no, that's correct because it is a second level spell. So basically what they're saying is you can cast these spells, a Moon Druid can cast these spells while in uh, wild shape form. So again, like they said, to replace the concept of burning a spell slot to self-heal, you can now use Cure Wounds, which does allow you to heal yourself if you want, but it also gives you the viability to cure other people. And if you heard what he just said, they also added mass Cure Wounds in there. So you can choose to keep yourself in animal form, but also do healing, which is great because, again, possibly the capability of you turning into an owl and having flyby. Fly in, heal your partner that's really hurt up, and then fly out of danger is an option that you now have for yourself, which you would not have had previously because of like the animal having something like flyby or a burrow speed. Burrow underground, pop up next to your ally, boop, heal him with Cure Wounds, and then go back underground. There's a lot of options here that they've added for that. And I really like that. Yes, you can now be a bat and cast Vampiric Touch. Again, assuming Vampiric Touch made its way into the final version. If it did, that's an option for you now, and that's kind of funny to me, and I like that. Spider blasting out Moonbeam is a great visual. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool options with this that I really like. And again, the benefit that they haven't gotten into officially here is the circle forms, right? They said your AC is now 13 plus your wisdom modifier, which is great because that's arguably going to be probably better than most of the animal hit point or the animal AC, and it might even be better than your base AC, which is really nice. The challenge rating increases as we're used to, right? For your druid level divided by 3 rounded down. But the big one is you now gain temporary hit points equal to 3 times your druid level while in Circle of the Moon, which means at a 20th level point, transforming into that, you will get 60 temporary hit points while in animal form on top of your base druid hit points. And reminder that if you were choose to end that wild shape and then re-wild shape, you will re-get those temporary hit points, which is something I feel people are missing because of the fact that you keep your own hit points. So you have 60 temporary hit points as a level 20 Moon Druid. If you get knocked out of that temporary hit points, you still maintain your form. But if you then choose to expend another use of Wild Shape to re-enter your Wild Shape again, you will re-get those 60 temporary hit points. It's 60 temporary hit points as a level 20 Moon Druid per expenditure of Wild Shape. So that does continue to happen. And the fact that, again, reminder that as an Archdruid, whenever you roll initiative and have no uses of Wild Shape left, again, we're talking level 20 here, so consider that, you'll get one back. Also, the fact that you can expend spell slots to get slots back, you can keep churning up that temporary hit points, arguably, almost as frequently as, not necessarily as frequently because it was unlimited Wild Shapes previously, but you get my point. You can keep getting those temporary hit points back. And that's the thing where I feel like a lot of people are missing. Now, again, they are going to continue to bring up that if you are a non-Moon Druid at level 20, it's only 20 temporary hit points in your non-Moon Druid form, right? If you're a other type of Druid and you transform, you'll only have 20 temporary hit points at level 20, which is kind of a bummer in the grand scheme of things, but it is still a decent chunk of health. And again, how often are you using your wild shape for something other than just like flight or recon, especially at level 20? Probably not that often. So, do you lose the temporary hit points when you change out? That's something to consider too. Let's take a look. Temporary hit points. When you assume, huh. When you assume a wild shape form, you gain a number of temporary hit points equal to your druid level. It doesn't say that you lose them if you leave the form. Not that it matters, right? Because especially as we're talking level 20, you can cast spells. There's really no no difference. And honestly, it might be just as fine to stay in animal form, but I'm not seeing anything here that says you lose those temporary hit points when you exit the form. So you could potentially just pop into form and then drop it to just get the temporary hit points in theory, right? So that's possible, I guess, So what I do want to talk about here too is a homebrew if people are really dead set on how this is such a huge nerf to the druid, which I do think this is a reasonable change, and I've said that already. Correct, as you say, a non-moon druid wild shaping isn't really your main shtick anyway. I agree. If you want to tweak it because you think it's not good enough for whatever reason, you got to just give the moon druid a little bit more and then the regular druid a little bit more. So you could, I think, maybe jump it up by 1 step each, where a non-moon druid gets 2 times their druid level and temporary hit points, and a moon druid gets 4 times or 5 times if you really want to go nuts, right? Moon druid gets 100 temporary hit points at level 20, whereas a non-moon druid would get 40. Right? That's the only thing I would do if I was going to tweak it. I think it's fine as it is personally, but if you are in a group where people are complaining or you want to try, you don't think it's good enough in your own mind, which is fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. If you think this is too much of a nerf, then that's what I would recommend you do is you just step it up, right? So you would take the base Moon Druid and maybe give him double Druid level temporary hit points. That'll arguably be a little more useful, especially at the lower levels. And then you just give the Moon Druid either 4 or 5 times, whatever you want to do. I agree, Brian Hartman. I do think 1 in 3 is in fact the sweet spot. 2 and 4, it would either be 2 and 4 or 2 and 5. And again, if you were to say do 2 and 5 at level 20, that would be very similar to elemental form hit points back in the day, when you would transform into an elemental. So if you're really trying to recapture that same amount, but I don't think it's necessary given all the other changes that are there. So 1 and 3 is where they're at, and I'm kind of okay with that. 2 and 4 would also be fine by me. 2 and 5 seems like a little much. Also, you bring up an excellent point, Tyler. Most players aren't going to see level 20, which I agree. But it's just, I'm using 20 because it's the highest number you could possibly have to give you a reference. But realistically, when you're a level 3 non-moon druid, are those 3 temporary hit points going to be useful to you? They might, maybe, possibly be good for you. But 6 might be better. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of hard. It's kind of hard to understand, right? So not hard to understand, but it's hard to balance. I'm gonna keep it probably at my tables as it is. Now, might I possibly introduce a concept of a feat or a magic item or some sort of training that the player does that might change that? That might be more the route I go. So we could probably bring Top 10 Tuesdays back, Grimbalaya. It's I'm going to continue on with the druid and then we'll vamp a little bit after that. But yes, we'll talk about that in a minute. But like I was saying, yeah, there's things to consider, right? Satirical, you bring up the concept of the spores druid and the way things work there. 4 times druid level temporary hit points, and with converting spell slots to wild shape, they can symbiotic entity and wild shape to benefit from the necrotic damage. Yeah, that's true. So I don't know. Ultimately, I think I'll probably just keep it. I'll probably just keep it as 1 in 3. And I was using level 20, like I said, to just give you the maximum amount. But I think, like I said, I might use a story reason why. If you're a non-moon druid and maybe you do a lot of transforming for one reason or another, maybe you study under moon druids in the course of the game, maybe then I give you a story benefit that now when you wild shape you do 2 times your druid level temporary hit points. That makes more sense to me. Tie it to something in the game that you're kind of making the player work for it without them actually knowing that they're working for it. I think that might be a better option. And maybe the same thing with the Moon Druid. Maybe, right, they do a thing that lets them bump it up to 4 times as opposed to 3 times. Little things like that I think would go a long way to help, one, make like an epic story moment when that happens, but also, it doesn't make it feel like it's a blanket thing you're giving everybody. You're kind of making it a cool thing for them. Whether, like I said, it could be a magic item or a special training. So I think that that's the way I would go. So yeah. All right, let's get back into it and we'll continue on here. But yeah, that's where I would probably go if I was going to give it any kind of tweaks, which I do want to play these things as they're written first before I decide it's time to homebrew them. Because honestly, some people are going to start homebrewing these things right out the gate. And if you don't try them in their base form as written, you're not really going to have a good handle on whether it needs to be tweaked. And that's ultimately why these tweaks are even happening in the first place. It's basically 10 years of active playtesting this system to then give you the refinements that we're getting.
So at higher levels, you also now have the option of having your beast form attacks deal radiant damage. Again, this sort of, this lunar theme. And also you have enhanced saving throws. You will also then at level 10 with Moonlight Step, you can start teleporting as a bonus action while you are really leaning into the power of your subclass. And one of the nice things about...
On top of that, you also get advantage when you do that teleport
and
on your next attack roll.
The nice thing, too, about Moonlight Step is this does not require you to be in beast form. Because we wanted to make sure that
I didn't realize
also
that.
We're getting a feature that wasn't relying on beast form.
Right.
Even though this subclass is primarily about using wild shape, we wanted you to have at least one cool thing you could do even when you're in your non-beast form.
Yeah, and then there's no traffic jam of you trying to turn into your beast form ahead of time if you wanted to use this ability, because those are both bonus actions.
Then at level
I'll let them keep
14,
going.
you're going to get lunar form, which means that when you attack in a wild shape, you're going to deal extra radiant damage. And also, when you use that Moonlight Step ability, you will be able to not only teleport yourself, but one willing creature. So bring along a friend.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about this because this is really interesting. So we talked about this. You'll notice this is a change just blanket across the board, is there are no more abilities in the game, at least from what we've seen thus far, that give you like your attacks are now magical for the purposes of overcoming damage resistance. Any class or thing that had the ability to do that has had it removed and has given the option to replace that damage with something else. So if you look here at Lunar Radiance, right, it says each of your attacks in wild shape form can deal its normal damage type or radiant damage. You make this choice when you hit. So now, like, and again, the same thing's going to happen for the monk, right? For example, like the monk, instead of doing bludgeoning damage with an unarmed strike, they can choose to do force damage instead. So for whatever reason in the game design, they have removed the things that say their attacks are now magical for the purposes of overcoming damage resistance. It's just you could choose to deal a different type. And most of those classes that had the ability to do that, they give them a very minimally resisted damage type like force, or in this instance, like radiant. And again, we also see here with increased toughness at level 6, you add your wisdom modifier to your constitution saving throws. Again, another instance of the druid having this ability to add another number to a saving throw. So you still add your constitution modifier, your proficiency bonus if you have it, and your wisdom modifier on top of it to your constitution saving throws. That's across the board. That is not while in that is while in wild shape form, but you have that. Again, this for the purposes of if you wanted to cast a spell and then wild shape to continue being in wild shape while concentrating on that spell, you will have an increased chance of maintaining that concentration and not dropping it. Then we have Moonlight Step, as they mentioned, as a bonus action on your turn, teleport 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see, and you have advantage on the next attack roll you make before the end of this turn. And as mentioned, it is not tied to Wild Shape. It is just a free bonus action teleport that you can do. This is Wisdom modifier times per long rest, but you can also expend a spell slot of level 2 or higher to get another use of it if you want. And then lastly, at level 14, Improved Lunar Radiance. Those attacks deal now an additional 1d10 radiant damage. And again, when you Moonlight Step, you can bring an ally with you. Here's the thing, right? Consider all of the stuff we've talked about, right? You extra AC, the extra temp HP, the boosted form, and the chance to do radiant damage, and the fact that you deal an extra d10 radiant damage with improved lunar radiance. Also stacks, if you chose, Elemental Fury at 7 and improved Elemental Fury at 15, which you could choose Primal Strike, which means in your animal form, you could, when striking as a level 4 or level 15 Moon Druid, have that attack be dealing all radiant damage, dealing an extra d10 radiant damage, and an extra 2d8 cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage on one of those attacks per turn, assuming you might have more than one. I don't know. I don't think it said that you don't get things like multi-attack. Well, it doesn't say you get the creatures free. So I don't know. That's still, jury's still out on that. Oh, okay. So I'll look at the D&D Beyond article because it does look like they have updated this. This is again is playtest 8. And again, I don't remember off the top of my head from the PDF copy of this that I have. So we'll look at the D&D Beyond article. So they possibly have an extra D10 now, it sounds like. So it's 2D10 plus the 2D8 from Primal Strike. So you really can do a significant chunk of damage as a Moon Druid when transformed, while also having these boosted temporary hit points, while also having the ability to teleport, boosted saving throws. So you could be concentrating, because don't forget, you could be concentrating on a buff spell for you, right? A lot of people will automatically think of things like Moonbeam, right? Because that's a spell you can cast while in form now, or like Call Lightning or something like that. But you could choose to cast some sort of buff on yourself before you transform that might boost it. Maybe it's an enlarge spell, or I don't know what it might be, that gives you extra damage or what have you, and your boosted concentration on that, while you could just rack up a ton of damage while zipping around the map with teleportation, which is pretty cool. All right, let's go ahead and keep going with this.
Perfect. All right, let's talk about Circle of the Land for the Druid.
Circle of the Land is the Druid subclass that is all about your spellcasting. And we have enhanced this subclass in a number of significant ways. One of the biggest ways we have enhanced it is right away when you get the subclass. It used to be that you selected a type of land that your Druid was connected to, and that gave you an expanded spell list. It was cool, but it meant you were sort of locked in. And we really wanted to amp up this sense that as a member of this subclass, you are kind of like the ultimate nature magician. And so to support that, we've now made it so that every time you finish a long rest is when you choose the type of land that you are connected to.
Nice. Okay.
And so now, every time you finish a long rest, you choose arid land, polar land, temperate land, or tropical land, and that gives you a set of spells that are available to you for that day. And again, you could...
And again, this kind of makes sense, right? If you're tuned to the land. And again, they picked, what did they say? Arid, polar, temperate, and tropical, as opposed to like mountain, underdark, or whatever the case may be. Especially if those spells are going to give you options that might help you better traverse or survive in those landscapes. Makes a lot of sense to be able to change that based on the landscape you're in when you finish a long rest, and also just provides you a ton more versatility and usability for this feature, whereas previously you kind of had to make that choice early on. That is one of the things I liked better about Baldur's Gate 3's version of it, was you chose at the point where you would level up and get a new set of levels, you picked the type of land you wanted. So where in 2014, you would pick that landscape right at the start and you were locked into that for the whole time frame. Baldur's Gate 3 had you choose each time you would access new Circle of the Land spells, which one you wanted, so you could kind of mix and match and bounce around, which was very nice. And this is now just taking that to the next level and just allowing you to swap them on a long rest.
Change every day which of those you want to be connected to, or if you have a strong thematic reason to be connected to just one, you also have the option to always be connected to one of these land types. But we wanted to give you more flexibility as a Circle of the Land Druid.
More importantly, if it stays the same way it is in the Unearthed Arcana, this is Lightning Bolt and Fireball on your Druid, accessible, switching between the two every time you have a long rest, but you could constantly have access to Fireball and Lightning Bolt as a Druid, which is fantastic.
And we also, in creating these 4 new lists, also optimize them so that they each have sort of spicy, really good reasons for you to select them.
This is one of my favorite abilities. We have Land's Aid.
So Land's Aid is a brand new feature in Circle of the Land that gives the Circle of the Land Druid a new way to use their wild shape. Because they are the spellcasting focused Druid, we didn't want them to feel like their wild shape was sort of sitting there unused, even though, yes, they could use it to get a wild companion. We wanted to give them a way to use wild shape that really speaks to their subclass fantasy. And so that's what Land's Aid is all about. You can burn wild shape uses to cause this eruption of nature magic that both, as you said, harms enemies, but also can heal somebody, and really speaks to the two sides of Druidic magic, because Druidic magic is, yes, about healing, but also about elemental destruction. And so Land's Aid was really a fun, brand new feature for us to provide in this subclass.
Again, so we talked about the fighter when I was doing that video about how I never really had any interest in playing a fighter in 5e. Druid, as many of you know, is one of my absolute favorite classes from D&D 3.5. It was my first character I ever played in Dungeons & Dragons, and I have a deep affinity and love and connection to the Druid from 3.5. And I was disappointed in the Druid in 5e because of the fact that it wouldn't let me fully relive the fantasy, the biggest one being the fact that there's no animal companion on the Druid. Don't save the Ranger discourse for later because I don't need that right now. But there was not a lot of ways to replicate the way I played my Druid in 3.5, which because it basically had all of the elements of a lot of these things kind of combined together, right? You had pretty good wild shaping, pretty good magic, and then also the animal companion. I would play a circle and I'm interested now in actually playing one, probably a Circle of the Land Druid, specifically this version of it, because of the fact of the versatility of the spell casting. But then also, again, Land's Aid is a really nice feature. We're going to have to look to see if that got changed, if they put that in the D&D Beyond article. But previously, in the Unearthed Arcana, when it had been released, it was basically pick a spot within 60 feet and erupt a 10-foot radius sphere, making creatures of your choice there make a con save, or taking a 2d6 necrotic damage, and then choose a creature also within that area to get 2d6 hit points, and then that would scale throughout levels to go all the way up to 4d6 for each. Again, we'll have to see. Maybe that D&D Beyond article will spell it out a little clearer. But either way, that was just a fun thing you could do, and it was limited to the uses of your wild shape, which, again, is a great way to expend that. So I love that. Okay, let's keep going.
I always like to be able to harvest my enemies for hit points.
But then we keep going on really leaning into the Circle of the Land being a consummate nature magician in natural recovery. This already in 2014 allowed the Druid to gain some spell slots back, but we've also now made it that with this you can cast one of your level 1 spells from your circle spell feature without expending a spell slot. So in a way, it's stretching your spell slots out even more than it did in 2014. Then in Nature's Ward at level 10, you not only are going to get a damage resistance that is associated with the land type you chose for your earlier feature, Circle of the Land spells, but you are also now immune to the poison condition with this feature. Real quick, go back to the amazing flexibility this subclass now has, because not only do you get to choose the list of spells that you're getting each day from your Circle of the Land spells feature, but when you reach level 10, that choice each day then is also determining a damage resistance that you're getting. Finally, Nature's Sanctuary also has brand new design for this druid at level 14, where you have yet another non-shape-shifting use for your wild shape,
right,
where you can cause trees and vines to erupt in an area, giving you and your allies half cover, and also sharing with all of your allies in that area the resistance you currently have from your Nature's Ward.
That's fantastic.
This subclass has enough change that it really is in the category of almost a brand new subclass.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, again, that wish fulfillment. Like, this is causing these trees and these vines to grow to protect all of your friends. That is a classic feeling druid trope, right?
So let's take a look at these features. Again, we're looking at this is Unearthed Arcana 6 for this stuff. But if you take a look here, right, we see here, as we talked about in Land's Aid. Also notice here that they also get an extra cantrip, Firebolt, Ray of Frost, Shocking Grasp, Acid Splash, which is also really nice, especially if you chose to go with the options for the Magician, where you could get, or sorry, not the Magician, the Potent Spellcasting, where those could now add your Wisdom modifier to the damage, and then the much later option at level 15, where you boost out their range to 300 feet. So if you were in an arid land situation and you chose that one, you could be shooting firebolts out to 320 feet, or sorry, 420 feet, which is pretty wild. And then again, as you can see here, you can cast one of your first level spells without expending a spell slot. So that would either be Burning Hands, Fog Cloud, Sleep, or Ray of Sickness. Here is those resistances here: fire, cold, lightning, poison. And then again, as we can see here, Nature Sanctuary, use your wild shape. Spectral trees appear in a spot within 120 feet of you in a 15-foot cube. Any of your allies in there that lasts for a minute, it's non-concentration as well. Get half cover, so that's a +2 to AC and a +2 to dexterity saving throws. And they also get this benefit of this damage resistance. And then as a bonus action, you can move that cube up to 60 feet to ground, 60 feet within 120 feet of yourself. So a nice little extra buff and reliability there. And then what does it say? In addition, whenever you finish a short rest, you can choose expended spell slots to recover. The spell slots can be a combined level that is equal to less than half your druid level, round up, and none of these spells can be 6th level or higher. So for example, if you're a 6th level druid, you can recover up to 3 spell levels worth of that, cover a 3rd level spell slot, a 2nd level spell slot, a 1st level spell slot, and so on. And it is only once per long rest on that. Again, this is the Unearthed Arcana 6, so this could be adjusted by what we see in the D&D Beyond article or what's in the final product, but this is just what's publicly available outside of that article. And it was always basically arcane recovery like the wizard had. That's kind of what Nature Druid or Land Druid always had. Let's keep going.
And especially for the Circle of the Land. This is for any player who really has come to the Druid to lean all the way in on the nature magic. And this Druid in particular, if they wanted to, could burn through all their wild shape uses and never turn into an animal, or turn into an animal. It's player's choice.
It's a very easy autumn Halloween vibe.
Yes.
Druid, if you wanted to play it that way.
Let's talk about the Circle of the Sea, which is a brand new subclass in this book. So this subclass is all about not only channeling the magic of oceans, but also of storms.
Yeah.
We realized when we were building out the quartet of subclasses for every class in this book that the Druid, with its Circle of the Land and Circle of the Moon, and then we also knew we wanted to bring in the Circle of the Stars, we were missing when it comes to sort of the terrestrial side of the Druid's fantasy. We were missing a subclass that had to do with oceans.
Yeah.
And so that's what this subclass is all about. And so you see that in the Circle of the Sea spells that they have access to, where again, it's this mix of aquatic and stormy themes. And we wanted to connect these two because not only
This is not the first brand new subclass. We talked about the Path of the World Tree Barbarian was technically a brand new one. This is another brand new one.
are storms so often associated with oceans in our world, we also wanted to make sure that this druid had things in their kit that are useful even when they are far.
And the dance part, yes. But we haven't officially covered that one yet, but Jenny D did release a video on it.
away from a body of water. Essentially, the storm component was critical to make sure we did not have an Aquaman problem, because that is always the danger.
That is always the danger.
With an aquatic themed character option in D&D is you don't want to have a situation where the character feels like they have nothing to offer unless they're in or near a body of water.
Because then it's very easily, as a dungeon master, like you are either having to find pools of water, or the dungeon master forgets, and then you don't get to be, the core of what you are trying to play.
Exactly. So to lean into that, having something you can do no matter where you are, we right away at level 3 in this subclass give you a feature called Wrath of the Sea. And just as the Circle of the Land has ways to use their wild shape that are other than transforming into an animal, and we'll see this theme repeated yet again when we get to Circle of the Stars, the Circle of the Sea Druid can expend a use of wild shape as a bonus action to manifest this sort of swirling, stormy ocean spray around themselves that relies on, like the Paladin's aura does on the new Emanation area of effect. While this is blasting around you, you can, once per turn, cause it to sort of storm up and force a target to make a Constitution saving throw. And if they fail, they're going to take some cold damage from this very chilly ocean spray, and you can also potentially hurl them away from you. So very dynamic. It's essentially a way for you to bring the ocean with you.
Yes.
This is also a way that we are avoiding the Aquaman problem. Yeah. bring it with you, my friend.
And it's a great spell list too. We've got Fog Cloud, Gust of Wind, Ray of Frost, Shatter, Thunderwave, Lightning Bolt.
Yes.
Water Breathing, Control Water, Ice Storm, Conjure Elemental, Hold Monster. Like, these are all fantastic spells.
These are really good. That's pretty much almost exactly what we saw here back in Unearthed Arcana 6. And again, here's Wrath of the Sea. Manifest that with an expenditure of wild shape. Again, Emanation wasn't a terminology that existed in Unearthed Arcana 6, but basically it's an aura that lasts 10 minutes. At each of your turns, choose a creature you can see within 10 feet. They must make a Constitution saving throw or take thunder damage, and if they're large or smaller, be pushed 15 feet away from you. Again, at this point, it was D6 is equal to your Wisdom modifier. That may have changed in the final version here, but consider that. Still a very useful ability to expend your wild shape to just deal damage, which is nice.
Yes, yeah, this was the Circle of the Sea Druid is going to be extremely formidable.
Yeah.
And you see that at level 6, where then your Wrath of the Sea Emanation gets even bigger. So you will have even more target options as your little mini ocean blasts people around you.
It increases by 10 feet.
Yes.
Which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then you also gain a swim speed equal to your speed. You are layering on more to your base abilities here.
And then that theme continues at level 10 with Stormborn, while your Wrath of the Sea is active, then you also gain a fly speed equal to your speed, and you have resistance to cold, lightning, and thunder damage.
Again,
so
very nice.
You're just going to turn into this walking, swimming, and flying
storm
with swirling ocean waters around you. And then at level 14, with the feature Oceanic Gift, you now have the option to manifest that moving oceanic storm around somebody else.
My wife and I are very obsessed with the fog. John Carpenter's The Fog. We're like, ooh, we can make a really creepy druid out of this one, where it's this fog constantly swirling around you.
Well, welcome to Circle of the Sea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that does pretty much track. They did mention that the aura changes size at level 6. Again, in Unearthed Arcana 6, that's not the case. It did also give you water breathing, always prepared. Here is the swim speed. If you use a wild shape, I don't know if this still exists, but it now had a swim speed. Again, here's the fly speed, the resistances, and now you can choose to put your Wrath of the Sea around somebody else. And it says, in addition, you can manifest the aura around both the other creature and yourself if you expend 2 uses. I don't know if that's still there. I think that's a pretty cool option, though. Maybe something to bring back in the form of something else, like a magic item or, again, a feat or something if you want. I am looking at the 2020 or the D&D Beyond article that many of you mentioned, just to see. Yes, 100% Lugia from the Pokemon movie 2000 vibes, 100%. It is primarily all about the Moon Druid. There's not actually a lot, like if you look at some of these other ones, like if you go back to base D&D Beyond, Warlock 2024 versus 2014, what's new? You have all this, but then they just focused on the Moon Druid? Is there one that's separate for just the Druid? No. Weird that they did like what's new with all of them and then just focused on the Moon Druid, which I think is an interesting choice. Yeah. Just the Moon Druid, I guess. But again, there's a nice table that kind of spells out the differences between the two. But yeah, not too much of it. It does say lunar form is when you hit level 5, your base damage plus 2d10 radiant damage plus the 2d8 of your choice from primal strike. So you could definitely deal. So it is now 2d10 as opposed to 1d10 like we saw in Unearthed Arcana 8, I believe. So very cool. It doesn't list out all of the Circle of the Moon spells here, but in the video they did mention Mass Cure Wounds, which is not technically an option listed in Unearthed Arcana, was it 8? But either way, things to consider. Yes, correct, John Mathis. A Warden Sea Druid would be very, very similar in a lot of ways to the Tempest Druid or Tempest Cleric, which is definitely going to be probably heavily inspiring when I go to update the Tempest Druid subclass to be a, to fit with the 2024 rules. So let's go ahead. We got one more, which is the Circle of the Stars.
Circle of the Stars is a really lovely subclass that we introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything.
Not a lot of changes
this
here,
is
if I
all
recall.
about drawing your powers from the nature that is up there. So Circle of the Land is all about the nature that's under your feet. Circle of the Sea, all about the powers of nature in oceans and in the storms associated with them. Circle of the Moon now, we now start looking up toward the sky, is about how the powers above affect the druid themselves. And then the Circle of the Stars, in a way, the camera pans back to look at the entire night sky and the forces of nature up there and how the druid can draw those forces down to help people, to harm people, and also gain glimpses into the future by reading the stars above. Other than shifting the levels around so that you get the subclass features at level 3, this is largely going to be what people saw in Tasha's Cauldron, but again,
But enhanced by the core class.
Exactly. So the Circle of the Stars in this book is now better because of the core class that it is attached to. Right. Because you can now take Circle of the Stars and integrate it with those choices, those primal order choices you're making in the base class, how you're deciding to use your wild shape, and Circle of the Stars, of course, gives you yet more ways to use your wild shape as you manifest different starry powers based on the constellations you decide to manifest. I think even people who have already been playing Circle of the Stars are going to feel that this is the best version of the subclass they've encountered yet, because again, of how it benefits from the new Druid base class.
I also like the idea of a benevolent stars druid out there, the light that is in the darkness. But in between those stars is the great old one, Warlock. And lurking around.
Of course, you want to bring everything back, to,
the Warlock.
It's not all about the Warlock,
It
Todd.
is. This is clearly the enemy of the Warlock.
It's not a PvP game.
Yeah.
They're friends.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Lots of huge changes for the Druid. I know people are extremely excited for these.
Yeah.
The new player's handbook is available.
All right. So yeah, it looks like again, if we were to look at it, I don't think there's really any need to necessarily look at the Stars Druid itself, because as mentioned, it is very much the same, almost not 100% identical to what we saw, but very similar in a lot of ways. So, again, it is like they're saying one of these subclasses that is basically brought up by the adjustments to the base class. So yeah, I like that a lot. And I always like Circle of the Stars. I kind of lean more towards Wildfire personally. I kind of liked it a little bit better. That also felt like a subclass that was closer in nature to my 3.5 Druid, mostly just because of the fact that they kind of get the pet in the form of the Wildfire Spirit. and I chose to do a lot of fire damage just by choice with that particular character in my 3.5 game. But that being said, Stars does have some really cool options here as well. I'm just taking a look to see. I believe it's basically exactly the same. Like they said, just adjustments to the subclass. Yeah. So without a spell slot. That looks to be the same. Same constellations. Is it Archer, Chalice, Dragon? Yep, that looks to be the same. Cosmic Omen. Looks like there might be. Nope. Is that the same? Yep, nope, that's the same. Twinkling Constellation. Yep, and then yeah, so it looks like it's basically exactly the same. Huge changes for the land and the Moon Druid, though. Big improvements in a lot of ways. A lot of nice adjustments to the base class as well. And Circle of the Sea Druid does also appear to be very strong. And again, I really like what I saw there. It does give me Tempest Cleric vibes, which I also like. And I think you are going to be pretty happy if you decide to go that route. You do have all of those extra spells that you get as well. Oh, by the way, for whoever was asking about the concept of the Moon Druid having Vampiric Touch, it does look like Vampiric Touch was dropped from, I believe, the final version of the book. So, yeah, I really like what I'm seeing on a lot of these. I think they're really great. If the only thing is people are getting held up on the temporary hit points thing, right? That seems to bother a lot of folks. It doesn't bother me. I like the changes. I think it brings things more in band with power level of other subclasses and classes. So I think overall Druid changes are a positive. And honestly, they didn't really nerf Moon Druid that much, in my opinion. You've got the extra temporary hit points, which is still pretty solid, and you can still get more of those. You can wild shape more often than you ever could. And depending on what level you're at, you could do chunky damage. We're talking an extra 2d8 and 2d10 on top of the base damage of the form you transform into. That's still a pretty solid amount. Your AC is almost going to always be better because it's 13 plus your wisdom mod. Probably pretty quickly you're going to get to that 20 wisdom as a druid. So you're going to be rocking an 18 AC while in animal form, which is better than I think every animal form you could ever transform into. So, yeah, I think it's going to be pretty solid. But yeah. And again, you don't get knocked out of the form. So there's definitely some stuff, like I said, that could possibly be clarified. Like, do you keep your species-based features when you wild shape? Because right now, it's as I read it, you don't, which could be a little interesting to see you basically not have resistance to fire anymore when you transform, which could be again interesting. They might have changed that. I'm not sure, but yeah, I really like what I'm seeing. I'm a fan of all of the stuff we've talked about here. Yeah, I am a huge fan of the Druid changes. I think the nerfs are warranted to some degree, and I don't think they're too much to really make the class unplayable. And I think the other changes to the base classes and the subclasses are a general improvement. So I am a fan of the changes to the Druid. Now, there are still two classes that were covered this week. The Wizard was one, which arguably the Wizard has almost no changes to Base Wizard. Base Wizard is almost exactly the same, and almost the subclasses are the same. Wizard's probably one of the classes that got the least amount of adjustments out of all of the classes and subclasses in from 2014 to 2024. And I think that just speaks to the strength of Wizard. But honestly, it is kind of a bummer to some degree because I feel like most of Wizard's power just comes from the versatility of the spell list, which is fine. And I like that. But also, kind of give the Wizards something cool, you know? But yeah, it's mostly versatility. Agreed. So what we're going to do here, what we're well, they're covering that on Monday, right? You don't forget tomorrow's Saturday. So they're not going to be covering that, I don't believe, tomorrow. But let's go ahead. What I'm going to do here, and this may be a little bit, and I realize this is going to be a slight inconvenience for everybody, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this live stream, and very shortly after, like in the next couple of minutes here, I'm going to start another live stream that we will do just to cover the wizard. And I would love to do the ranger tonight, but I think I'm going to have to save the ranger for tomorrow because I don't think I can do that to myself. I have very strong opinions on the ranger, as you all well may know. And most of my thoughts and opinions on the ranger have not changed since the Unearthed Arcana. And it's just like, what are you doing? Like, how did you look at that and think that that was a good call? That's my question, because it's... Anyway, it's just... Hunter's Mark is not a ranger's identity. But let's make it that. Let's not give it to them non-concentration, and let's make their super good level 20 ability a slight change in the damage die of Hunter's Mark. That's it. That's what we're going to do. That's it. Freaking paladins can do better than that with like improved divine smite or whatever it's called, where you're just dealing an extra d8 damage every hit. The moon druid can do more damage, like consistently. But we're just... Yeah, stop making a level 1 spell a class identity. Agreed. I know. We're gonna... If anything is gonna come close to making me spoil that embargo, it's the hatred I have for the ranger. And it sucks because I love rangers, right? Like I identified with rangers for a long portion of my life as an outdoorsy type growing up, as an archer myself. All this kind of stuff is like a huge part of like what I used to love playing rangers and foresty characters and animal, summoning classes and all this other kind of stuff. And to just see the fumble over seemingly at every turn is just wild to me. And if you say the ranger's not that bad, all I will do is point you to the number of Unearthed Arcanas over the past 10 years that have been made at fixing the ranger. Because it's not just one. It's multiple options where they tried to fix the ranger because they recognized that it was so bad. Baldur's Gate 3 fixed it. I don't know how they did it. Simplest thing was just giving the animal companion its own turn, but whatever. Let's see. Just out of curiosity, just check one thing. Okay. So, Paladin. Okay, let's just like, well, for a little bit, and then we'll stop and we'll go do the wizard video for real though. Just here's our Unearthed Arcana list of all the Unearthed Arcana for all of 5e. So we had Unearthed Arcana in the 6th of April 2015 was modifying classes. There's options in here for a spellless ranger, which was just like a fun extra option, right? Then we had variant rules. We had the mystic. Then we had the ranger, revised ranger. It was called because they recognized that ranger needed to be revised. Revised ranger. Okay. Moving along. What do we got here? Gothic heroes, feats, all this kind of stuff. The faithful. The ranger, revised. Another attempt at reviving and readjusting the ranger. And we're moving on. Keeping going. Then we start just doing with subclasses because we were moving on to what was coming out in Tasha's Cauldron. And then we had the Wizard revisited, which was Theurgy Wizard, so good. Wish that made it through. It did not. We had some revised subclasses. Did we get another one for the ranger? I forget if there was another option to try to fix the ranger. This is all races, sidekicks, artificer revisited, the artificer returned. There's so many attempts to make the artificer work. Then we are into the subclasses. I think at this point we had stopped trying to adjust the ranger, but there was at least 2 attempts to fix the ranger in the past. That just didn't. So let's see. Where was it? There was the first one. Was it the first one where they gave them their hit die were 2d6? Was it this one? $2d6 hit points. Man, they were really trying all sorts of stuff to make rangers funky. I remember this. They didn't get medium armor in this one. Like, they tried so many different weird changes to it. And even still, they still didn't have it have this one. What did this class only went to level 5 though at this point? Yeah, this one only went up to level 5. Was this first attempt because they realized there was so much work that needed to be done. They only were going to work on the first 5 levels. And then we had, look at ambuscade, right? Roll initiative, you gain a special turn that takes place before the others on this turn. You can use your action to either take the attack or hide action. More than one creature in the encounter has this feature. They all act first in the initiative order. Normally starts you're surprised, you're not surprised. Skirmish or stealth. You're difficult to detect or attack even when you normally make your, like, there was some cool stuff here. And it was the spirit path, right? Where all rangers gain a spirit companion. What is a thing I'd been saying since the start that I feel like rangers should have had like an animal companion as their base feature. And then, like, similar to what we just talked about with the druid, how like all druids can wild shape, but a moon druid is just better at wild shaping. I still stick by that all rangers should get an animal companion, and then the beastmaster should just be better. But even back here, all rangers got a spirit companion, which did cool things. And that was just like a thing that they had. And then we had a couple of different options here. We had the Guardian, Seeker, and Stalker ranger paths, which maybe we'll go back and revisit these in an official video at some point. But yeah, it's just interesting that we took 2 separate attempts at totally redoing the ranger. And we never got anything really super substantial out of it. But either way, we'll save that salt for the video, as somebody said. So, I mean, they did take a lot of the Tasha's features and just bake it into the class. Like, a lot of those just became part of the base class, but it's still not very good. Oh, right, the Tasha's alternate features. Yeah, that's true. Honestly, the changes to Hunter Ranger are some of my least favorite because they removed some of the options that made Hunter Ranger so good. And Hunter Ranger is just absolute trash now. Yeah. Honestly, Wild Companion as a Ranger thing would have been better as a Ranger thing than a Druid thing, in my opinion. Right? Give them the cool thing. Anyway, I don't want to. You're right. I need to take a break from this and not get all. I need to get some sleep before I can bring my full rage towards the Ranger video tomorrow. That being said, oh, and yeah, the concentration issue. Anyway, let's end this live stream before I get too spicy and go down that road. And we will come back in just a few minutes here with a separate live stream for the wizard, because we want our wizard friends to get their own video that'll be easy for other people to find. And honestly, the wizard one should probably go pretty quick in the grand scheme of things because there hasn't been that many adjustments to the wizard itself. So anyway, thank you guys all so much for watching. Stay tuned. Keep your eye on the YouTube. You don't have to go very far because I'm basically just going to like make a cup of coffee with my coffee pot that's right here, and I'll start it and then just restart the stream. So just be on the lookout for that. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in like 2 minutes. Bye.